Put yourself in the cockpit of the most feared aeroplane in the Pacific. It is early in 1942, and you are flying a fighter that, right now, at this exact moment in the war, simply cannot be beaten. Feel how light she is under your hands. She is so light, so alive, that she seems to turn with a thought before you've even properly decided to. You pull her round into a turn tighter than anything the enemy can follow, and you watch the fellow who was chasing you go sailing helplessly past, unable to hold the corner, and now he is in front of you, and now he is yours. You can out-turn them. You can out-climb them. And you have come from so far away, over so many hundreds of miles of open ocean, that they never even believed a fighter could reach them here at all. You are flying the Mitsubishi A6M, the Zero, and in these opening months you are not a pilot in a war so much as a rumor that has come true. Allied airmen who meet you in live are going home and telling their friends not to fight you. Don't turn with him. Don't climb with him. Whatever you do, don't try to dogfight the thing. Just dive away and run and pray he lets you go. You are untouchable. You have never yet met the machine or the man that can kill you. And that feeling right there of being the best thing in the sky and knowing it is the most dangerous place a fighter pilot or a fighter can ever be. Because everything that makes your aeroplane untouchable this morning is the very same thing that is going to get thousands of young men just like you burned out of the sky within 18 months. The Zero is not what she looks like from in here. From in here she looks like a miracle. So hold that feeling, the lightest, sweetest, deadliest fighter in the world, and a young man certain he will live forever, because the story of how the miracle became a death trap is one of the saddest and most important stories in all of engineering. Let me put the spanner down and say hello properly. The name's Reg. 40-odd years I've spent as a fitter and a restorer, an old grease monkey who's lain underneath more old machines than he can count, coaxing dead ones back to life. Now, if you've been round here before, you'll know my heart usually belongs to the big, honest, hard-working machines, the heavy bombers, the tanks, the lorries. I'm not generally a man for fighters. Too much glamour, too much of the lone ace with his white scarf for my taste. But I'll make an exception, and I'll make it gladly for this one. Because the Zero is the fighter that keeps an engineer awake at night. She is, to my mind, the most perfect example in the whole war of a machine that was absolutely brilliant and absolutely doomed for exactly the same reasons. She's not a story about a bad design. She's a story about a beautiful design that answered the wrong question, and about what it costs in young men when you build a machine that's magnificent for a war you don't actually get to fight. So wipe your feet, mind the oil, and let's get this famous little aeroplane up on the trestles and have a proper, honest look at her. Because she is not the invincible wonder plane of the legend. She's something far more human than that. She's a warning. Let's start with where she came from because it tells you everything. She was designed for the Imperial Japanese Navy in the late 1930s, and the man whose name you want to remember is Jiro Horikoshi, the chief designer at Mitsubishi. And I want you to feel some sympathy for Horikoshi, because the Navy handed him a specification that was, frankly, close to impossible. They wanted a carrier fighter, so small enough to live on a ship. They wanted it to be tremendously agile, able to out-dogfight anything in the sky. They wanted it heavily armed with cannon, not just machine guns. And this is the killer. They wanted it to have enormous range. They wanted a fighter that could fly for hour after hour, hundreds upon hundreds of miles out over the Pacific, escort the bombers all that way, have a proper fight at the far end, and then fly all the way home again. Now, Any engineer will tell you those things fight each other. Range means fuel, and fuel is weight. Cannon are weight. Agility hates weight. Toughness, armor, protection is weight. You cannot, by the ordinary rules, have all of it at once. Something has to give. And here is Horikoshi's genius, and here, in the very same breath, is the tragedy. He decided what would give. He built the whole aeroplane around one ruthless idea: lightness. He made her, for her day, astonishingly light, a clever, advanced, lightweight structure, an elegant airframe with every ounce he could find pared away. And it worked spectacularly. Because she was so light, a modest engine could hurl her about the sky like a swallow. Because she was so light, she could carry the fuel to reach clean across the ocean. Because she was so light, she outturned and outclimbed everything. On range, on agility, on climb, she was, at the moment she appeared, quite possibly the finest carrier fighter in the entire world. Horikoshi had solved the impossible problem. He really had. But you and I, standing here in the workshop, we already know the question nobody in that room wanted to ask out loud. If she's that light, what did he take out to get there? What did he leave off? And this is the heart of the whole thing, so let me say it plainly, standing right here by her wing. To make the Zero that light, Horikoshi left out the things that keep the pilot alive. There is almost no armor, no thick steel plate behind the seat to stop a bullet meant for the pilot's back, because armor is heavy, and heavy was the one thing she could not be. And worst of all, and this is the one that truly matters, her fuel tanks are not self-sealing. Now let me explain what that means, because it's the difference between life and death. A self-sealing tank has a lining that, when a bullet punches through it, closes up around the hole, swells shut, seals the leak, so the fuel doesn't come pouring and spraying out to catch fire. It's heavy, that lining, and it eats into the fuel you can carry. The Zero doesn't have it, so when a few rounds go into a Zero's tanks, the petrol sprays out into the airflow and it takes one spark, one tracer, one hot fragment, and she is a torch. So picture the two aeroplanes that are about to fight each other across this war. On the one side you'll have the American fighters, heavier, less nimble, slower to climb, but built like a safe. Armor behind the pilot. Self-sealing tanks, made to soak up punishment and bring the man home. And on the other, the Zero, a rapier. Faster turning, longer-legged, deadlier in a graceful dogfight, and with nothing, almost nothing, between her pilot and the enemy's guns. She could dish it out like nothing else in the sky. She simply could not take it. And for a while, for a glorious, terrifying while, that trade looked like the smartest bargain anyone had ever made. Because in the opening act of the Pacific War, the Zero ran riot, from the attack that brought America into the war, and on through the months that followed over the Philippines, over Malaya, over the Dutch East Indies, right out across the Indian Ocean. The Zero was the master of the sky, and it wasn't close. Allied pilots came up in what they had, and what they had could not turn with her, could not climb with her, and kept being bounced by fighters that, by every sensible calculation, had no business being able to reach that far from any airfield or carrier. It got so bad it earned a name among Allied airmen, a kind of dread, a Zero panic. The word went round every squadron in the theater: do not dogfight the Zero. Do not try to turn with him. If you see one on your tail, don't be a hero, shove the nose down, dive away hard and fast and get out. She was, in those early months, exactly the untouchable machine of our cold open. The legend was, for a season, simply true, and that is precisely the moment, the very peak, the top of the climb, when everyone on the winning side is certain the machine is invincible. that the ground begins, very quietly, to give way beneath her. Because here's the thing about being top of the sky. It doesn't make the other side give up. It makes them go away and think. And a thinking enemy is the most dangerous enemy there is. The Allies did two things, and both of them turned the Zero's greatest strength straight back against her. First, they stopped playing her game. They'd learned, in blood, not to dogfight, so they built tactics around simply refusing the turning fight the Zero wanted, and forcing the kind of fight she was worst at. Their heavier fighters couldn't out-turn her, but they were sturdier. And crucially, they were faster in a dive. Because the poor light Zero couldn't safely follow them down, push her past a certain speed, and the controls grew heavy and stiff as concrete. And the airframe simply wasn't built to be hauled about at those speeds. So the Allied answer became, come down from above, fast, hit hard in one slashing pass, and dive away before she can bring that lovely turn to bear. Don't dance with her. Mug her and run. Boom and zoom, they called it. And against that, all her beautiful agility was suddenly worth a great deal less. And second, and this is where the missing armor and the missing self-sealing tanks come home to roost, when those heavy Allied guns finally did land on her, she died so easily. A short burst that an American fighter might have shrugged off and flown home with would open the Zero's tanks and set her ablaze in a heartbeat. The very lightness that made her a swallow made her a matchstick. So the exchange rate, which had been all in Japan's favor, began to swing, and then to swing hard. The Zero could still turn beautifully. It just increasingly didn't get the chance, and when it was hit, it burned. And then the Allies got a gift. In the middle of 1942, up in the cold and the fog of the Aleutian Islands off Alaska, a Zero was hit, and its pilot tried to put it down on what looked like flat ground and turned out to be bog. The aeroplane flipped, the pilot was lost, but the machine itself came to rest very nearly intact. The Americans recovered it, shipped it home, carefully repaired it, and did the thing every Air Force dreams of doing to the enemy's best weapon. They flew it. They test flew the Zero themselves, wrung it out, and mapped exactly what it could and could not do, precisely where its strengths lay, and precisely at what speeds and in what maneuvers it fell apart. The Akitan Zero, they call it. Now I have to stop and flag something honestly here, because the tidy version of this story makes that one captured aeroplane the magic key that unlocked everything, and the truth is argued over. How decisive the Akitan Zero really was is genuinely disputed among historians. It certainly gave the Americans a beautiful, detailed confirmation of the Zero's weaknesses. But Allied pilots were already learning those weaknesses the hard way, in combat, and some of the best anti-Zero tactics were being worked out before that captured machine ever gave up its secrets. So don't let anyone tell you one aeroplane in a bog won the air war. It didn't. It was one important piece, a confirmation and a refinement of a picture the Allies were already, painfully, assembling for themselves. I'd rather give you the honest, blurry truth than the neat and tidy lie. The tactics were the first half of the answer, and the cleverest of them has a name worth knowing, the Thatch Weave, after an American naval officer, John Thatch, who dreamed it up. And it's beautifully simple, the way the best ideas are. Two fighters fly along side by side, a little apart. The moment a Zero latches onto the tail of one of them, the pair don't panic and scatter. They turn hard in toward each other, they weave, they cross over. And that maneuver swings the second fighter around until he's pointing straight at the Zero that's chasing his friend. And now the hunter has a hunter of his own, lined up dead ahead. Think about how elegant that is. It takes the Zero's single greatest gift, her willingness to turn in tight behind a victim, and it uses that very eagerness to fly her straight into another man's guns. You beat the turning fighter not by turning better, you never will, but by making her turn kill her. And then came the second half of the answer, the machine built for the job. The Grumman F6F Hellcat. And the Hellcat is the Zero's opposite in every way that now mattered. Where the Zero is light, the Hellcat is heavy and strong. It's got armor around the pilot. It's got self-sealing tanks. It's faster, especially in the dive, and it hits like a sledgehammer with those heavy guns. It cannot turn with a Zero, and it never tries to. It uses exactly the tactics we've talked about. Comes down fast, hits hard, keeps its speed. It's a fighter designed deliberately and specifically to fight the way that beats the Zero and to survive the mistakes that killed less protected men. And it did the job. You'll see a famous figure quoted for the Hellcat, a kill ratio of something like 19-1, 19 enemy aircraft downed for every Hellcat lost. And I'll flag it plainly, as I always do. That particular number is a much-repeated claim, and it's debated, and single dramatic statistics in wartime deserve a raised eyebrow. But argue the exact figure how you like, the shape of it isn't in doubt. The Hellcat comprehensively beat the Zero, and the aeroplane that had been untouchable was, by the middle of the war, being swept from the sky. But you know, the aeroplane is only half of it, maybe less than half, because the cruelest thing that happened to the Zero wasn't done to the machine at all. It was done to the men who flew her. At the start, the Zero was flown by some of the finest, most experienced fighter pilots in the world, superbly trained naval aviators with years in the cockpit, many of them combat veterans before this war even started. A great pilot in that light, agile aeroplane was a nightmare to fight. But look at what that light, agile aeroplane did to a great pilot when his luck finally ran out. No armor. No self-sealing tanks. When a veteran Zero pilot was hit, far more often than not, he did not get to bail out, wounded, and come back to fight another day the way a protected enemy pilot so often did. He burned, or he went into the sea. The machine that would not protect its pilot was, quietly, killing off the most precious and least replaceable thing the whole Japanese Naval Air Force had, its veterans. And they died in numbers that could never be made good. At the great carrier battles, Coral Sea, and above all at Midway in the summer of 1942, and then in the long, grinding, bloody attrition over the Solomons and Guadalcanal that followed, month after month, Japan's irreplaceable veteran airmen were used up. And here is the part that seals the tragedy. The training system behind them could not replace them. Where the Allies built a vast machine for turning out thousands of well-trained new pilots, Japan's pipeline was narrow, and it stayed narrow far too long. So the veterans died, and the men who took their place had less and less training, and were sent up in a fighter that offered them almost no protection, against an enemy who now had better tactics, better aeroplanes, and far better odds of surviving their own mistakes. It became, by the end, a slaughter, not because the Zero had suddenly become a bad aeroplane in some absolute sense, but because a machine that trades the pilot's life for performance is the very worst machine to hand a frightened boy with 50 hours in his logbook, in a war you are now losing. So let me pull it all together on the bench here, because when you stand back, the Zero's whole story snaps into a single, hard, clean shape. The Zero was not a bad design. Get that clear, because the lazy version of this story says she was some flimsy death trap the Japanese foolishly went to war with, and that's simply not true. She was a brilliant design. She was, arguably, the best carrier fighter in the world on the morning the war started. The trouble is she was brilliantly optimized for the wrong war. She was built, right down in her bones, for a short, sharp, victorious war. A war of quick, decisive strokes, where you win big and fast before the enemy can gather himself, where your veteran pilots stay alive because they keep winning, and where you never have to fight a long, grinding contest of who can build the most aeroplanes and train the most men and absorb the most losses and keep coming. For that short war, trading armor and protection for range and agility was a perfectly rational bargain. Brilliant, even. But Japan did not get the short war. It got the long one. And in a long war, all the things the Zero gave up, the toughness, the pilot protection, the ability to take a hit and bring the man home so he can fight again tomorrow, all those things it sacrificed for early brilliance turned out to be exactly the things that win the long game. The Zero optimized for the sprint and then found herself in a marathon, and you cannot win a marathon in a sprinter's body. My granddad, who taught me most of what I know with a spanner, had a saying he'd trot out whenever some young mechanic wanted to strip the weight out of a machine to make it quicker. He'd say, you can always go faster if you throw away the brakes. The question is what happens at the first corner. He never flew a Zero, obviously, and I don't suppose he ever heard of Horikoshi. But he'd have understood that aeroplane in about 10 seconds flat. He knew in his hands that the cleverest saving is very often the one that kills you later. My old workshop partner Stan and I had one of our proper settas over this very aeroplane. Stan reckons the Japanese were mad to build a fighter with no protection for the pilot, reckless, he says, throwing men's lives away. And I told him he'd got it precisely backwards. It wasn't reckless. It was the coldest, most careful sum you ever saw, every ounce accounted for, every gram of armor weighed against every mile of range, and the answer came out the same each time. Leave the protection off, take the performance. The engineers, bless 'em, did their arithmetic beautifully. They just did it for a war that didn't come. Stan went quiet at that, which for Stan is practically a standing ovation. Even Bessie, that stubborn old tank I spent 2 years dragging back to life, who still won't start on a cold morning purely to spite me. Even Bessie was built the opposite way to a Zero. Slow, heavy, protected, and she'll outlive the lot of us. Because here's where I turn it round on you, and I didn't take you up into the cockpit of the deadliest fighter in the Pacific just to teach you about an old aeroplane. Every one of us has a Zero in us somewhere. Every one of us at some point makes the Zero's bargain. You strip something out to go faster. You leave off the armor. Maybe it's rest. Maybe it's the people who'd slow you down. Maybe it's the careful, boring, heavy things, the savings, the health, the margin, the friendships you don't have time for, all the ballast you throw overboard to climb quicker and turn tighter than everyone around you. And for a season it works. You're untouchable. You outturn the lot of them and you feel like the best thing in the sky. But ask yourself the question my granddad asked. What happens at the first corner? What happens when the short race you optimized for turns, as it so often does, into a long one? Because the things we strip out to win the sprint, the rest, the protection, the people, the margin, those are the very things that get you home in the marathon. The Zero was magnificent and the Zero burned, and it was the same decision that did both. So that's my question for you, and I do read the comments. So tell me honestly, what's the armor you've stripped out of your own life to go a bit faster, and has the corner come yet? Or are you still up there in the early war, untouchable, certain it'll always be the sprint? I'd genuinely like to know. Put it down below. And spare a thought before you go for the young men who flew her, the veterans who died in a machine that wouldn't protect them, and the frightened boys sent up after them with barely the training to take off, in the most beautiful, most murderous bargain ever bolted together. Whatever their leaders got wrong, and they got a great deal wrong, those lads climbed in and went, same as young men did on every side. The least we can do, all these years on, is get the machine story right. Not the invincible wonder plane of the legend, and not the flimsy joke of the lazy retelling, but the truth, the finest sprinter in the world, sent to run a marathon. I'm off to see if I can bully Bessie into starting, though I shan't hold my breath. And if you've enjoyed an honest look at a legend, the miracle that was also the trap, then subscribe and stick around because I've a whole hanger of these to get through. The beautiful failures, the ugly winners, the machines that were perfect for exactly the wrong war. The name's Reg. Mind the oil on your way out. And next time somebody tells you the Zero was an invincible wonder, you smile, and you ask them the one question that matters. Invincible for how long? And at what price to the boy strapped inside it?